Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is the Great Big History Podcast. And in this episode, we do nothing controversial at all. Christianity. Oh. Yes. Roman Christianity. Now, we're going to talk about this. And here's the thing about it. You're going to do a couple of things. You're going to, one, maybe nod along and be like, okay, this is a history class. This is historical Roman Christianity. I got it. You're going to, two, get angry and be like, that's not my Christianity. It's not what I believe. Well, I will agree with you. Remember, your Christianity is 2,000 years evolved. It's different. It has changed. Jewish Christianity, Jesus' Christianity, is wildly different than, say, being a Baptist, Pentecostal, even being Catholic or Orthodox. Even Roman Christianity is talking to a different audience with different values than you. So you have to understand, we've had medieval Christianity, we've had the Enlightenment, we've had the Reformation, we've had a lot of development in Christianity since this period. So the third reaction you could have is, right on, man, this is awesome, this is great, I totally understand where we're going. I totally understand. I'm totally with Jesus. Jesus is my homeboy. But in the past, I have had students who get upset because what I explain is not what they believe. And I'm here to tell you that that's perfectly fine. But what early Romans believed is what they believed, and what early Christianity was trying to do was what early Christianity was trying to do. It's very different today. It's much more established, much more regular. You've had the breakup between the Catholic and Orthodox faith, and then between the Catholic and the Protestant faiths. And then the Protestant faiths have all broken up into all kinds of things. So there's not the single unitary belief system anyway. So you're going to say, this is not what I believe. Well, you probably don't believe what, say, Jehovah's Witnesses believe either, or what Mormons believe. Catholics and Baptists have different Our Fathers, for example. Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants have different Easters. So understand that there are differences. That's all I'm saying. So we got to start with Jesus. Jesus is my homeboy. Jesus. You don't get Christianity without Jesus. Though there is an argument to be made that Jesus may not be the most important person in the development of Christianity. But Jesus. Start with Jesus. Now I know what you think about Jesus. When you close your eyes and you think about Jesus, he's a 6'2" tall, blonde dude with blue eyes and straight and or maybe wavy blonde hair. He is definitely sexy, thin. The best representation of him is like Jeffrey Hunter, where it's just, he's just got these blue eyes. And the thing is that's a representation of Jesus. That's not what Jesus probably looked like. Jesus was probably a 5'3". He would have been about 5'3". Semitic man, Jewish man. So his skin color would have been some variation between white and brown, because Semitic peoples were. He would have had curly brown to black hair. He would have had a beard, and would have been 5'3". In like the 90s, Time magazine tried to use the new technology of genetic genomes to figure out what Jesus might have looked like, and they posted it. They had what Jesus really looked like, and people freaked out. They went, "That is not my Jesus. My Jesus is a 6'2", blonde, blue-eyed, Aryan super dude." And here's the thing. Jesus isn't even that. Jesus is that to a particular place and time. Jesus changes. And there's an argument in art history that is Jesus represents what is attractive in any time and place. If you go to Africa, he's not a tall, white, blonde dude. Jesus is black. That Jesus represents sexiness. Because Jesus is Jesus. Jesus is always awesome. So if an artist is going to draw Jesus, he's not going to make Jesus ugly. So he's going to represent Jesus by what the value system of that society is. So the art historical argument is, go look at their representations of Jesus, and that will tell you what that society at that time found attractive. The same thing happens to Buddha. As Buddha travels east, he changes. He gets heavier. His eyes get more East Asian. He looks less Indian. And he looks more Chinese or Japanese. But then when Buddhism goes to Southeast Asia, it changes again. And you don't have a Chinese-looking Buddha. You have a Thai and a Vietnamese-looking Buddha. And again, Buddha changes. His dress changes. His posture changes. The iconography changes. So, since these are there's no photography, there's no ability to hold on to an image and know exactly what it is, you get the representation of that image. So what Western Europeans and Americans want is a blonde, blue-eyed, 6-foot-tall Jesus. But that wasn't a Mediterranean Semitic man in the 1st century AD. So already you should understand that what you think of as Christianity is not Christianity. It's different. So who is Jesus? Jesus is a Jewish social reformer. He is talking to Jews. He's a Jewish man with Jewish disciples talking to Jews, wanting them to have a more fundamentally religious worldview. Now, why? Well, because Jewish life in the 1st century AD is tough. They were recently conquered by the Romans. Now, they weren't so much as conquered as absorbed, because the Roman territory of Palestine was part of the Seleucid Empire. It was part of, it was part of Ptolemy at a time. I think it's the Seleucid Empire when Pompey comes through. But the idea is they were a minor part of another empire, of a Greek empire. And so they got absorbed in the same way the Ionian Greeks get absorbed with the Lydians by Cyrus. First in Palestine, around 50 BC, gets absorbed. Or a little earlier, 60 BC, gets absorbed as part of a Greek empire by the Romans. And so the ancient Hebrews go from living in a Greek world to living in this Roman world, which is bigger and different, and in some ways sexier. And here's the interesting thing. The Romans are totally cool with the Jews having this weird monotheistic God. See, the Romans are conservative. And they looked at the Hebrews and said, you have a weird God. We don't really like it. You should have gods like everybody else. But this God is obviously old and it works for you. So you might as well keep it. Now that will change. But the idea of the Hebrew God is old. And the Hebrew God at this point is 2,000, about 1,000 years old, 1,500 years old. In terms of a settled civilization existing that worshiped this God. So the Romans respected that and said, okay, you're weird people, but you can keep your one God. And so brought them in to a Roman Empire in a way the Greeks didn't always bring in the Jews, didn't incorporate the Jews in. The Greek world was you were supposed to become Greek. And the Hebrews and the Jews were like, no, we can speak Greek and we can sell stuff in Greek markets, but we're going to stay Hebrews. We're going to stay Jews. And so it's not a surprise that this is going to bring about cultural shifts, cultural changes that are going to upset the culture. And so Jesus is one of many social reformers coming through, trying to explain how does one live in this new Roman world? How Roman should one be? How Jewish should one be? And his answer is, interestingly, liberal. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Give unto God what is God. A separation of church and state. It's you do what you need to do for politics. Caesar wants taxes, you pay your taxes. Caesar wants you to join the army, you join the army. You do what you have to do for Caesar, but you stay loyal to your belief system. So you separate political you from religious you, which is a very modern concept that you could have multiple yous. Like the medieval world doesn't have that. But it's this idea of how to deal with this new world. He is not a conservative. He is not a literalist. And these will be the Sadducees. These will be the people who will be his biggest critics, will be the people who come to him and say, you're not following the rules of the law. We've seen this before. We saw this during when Israel got destroyed. Now we've got Rome. Rome can destroy us too. So you better follow the rules. The conservatives looked at their world and saw Babylon, Assyria, and said, God is punishing us. We better be good. We better follow the rules. And so you see this over and over and over again. The Pharisees or the Sadducees come up to Jesus and go, you can't heal the sick. It's the Sabbath. And Jesus' response is, how can doing something good be bad just because of what day it is? And this is the tension between the spirit of the law, do something good, worship God by doing something good, and the letter of the law, which is don't do any work on the Sabbath. Two, he's also an apocalyptic prophet. Jesus keeps talking about the end of the world, that the end of the world is coming. On the third day, we'll destroy the temple, and on the third day we'll rise again. That this is also very traditional. See the other prophets, Elijah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah. I mean, Jeremiah gets up and is like, you're all going to be murdered. Judah is going to pay for all of its sins. And the Judeans are like, dude, we're following the law. What do you want from us? He's like, you're not doing it enough. You're going to all die. This is very traditional. Apocalyptic prophets pop up all the time. Now, you can say, well, this is stupid. The end of the world didn't happen. But the end of the world did happen. And it happened on Jesus' timeline. Now, here's the thing. The Gospels are written around the time and after the time of the destruction of Palestine, the destruction of Judea, the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. So here's the question. And it's a question, it's an unanswerable question, because there's no documents from Jesus' life to know what he talked about at the time. Is all of this talk of the apocalypse, is he talking, does he talk about 70 AD? Or is that backstoried? Is that the writers at the time, knowing that Jerusalem will be destroyed, making that the clear reference of what he's talking about? Because for Jewish life, the world ends in 70 AD. When the Roman emperor and 5 legions put down a rebellion, destroy Jerusalem, pick up the Hebrews, and scatter them through the empire. Intent to do a genocide the same way the Assyrians actually did it. You pick them up, you move the people, and then you put like 1 or 2 Jews in a small town. And the idea is, over a long period of time, what they will do is marry local people, local Roman girls. They'll have kids. Those kids will want to be Roman because being Roman is cool. They'll marry local Roman girls. Their kids will want to be cool, will speak Latin, will join the Roman army, and they'll just forget over a period of 100 years, just like the 10 lost tribes, forget their Jewish roots. In the same way Americans have lost their European roots or African roots. Well, that's complicated. But as a European immigrant, as a descendant of European immigrants, I'm not Irish or Hungarian or German or French or Italian anymore. I become something new. I can claim I have that heritage, but I don't speak any of those languages. I can't go back to those countries and get off the plane and say, I'm home, and be taken seriously by anybody. The African culture is different because that was stamped out. That wasn't willingly absorbed and given up, but it was stamped out. And so that, I make mention to that, but it is different, and that should be acknowledged. That has to be acknowledged. It's a different transition of culture from one to the other. But the idea is Americans are something different. And in 3 generations, 4 generations, what your immigrant grandfather was, you're not. And certainly your kids won't be. My grandfather was fluent in Italian. I am not at all. Other than ciao, ciao. I got ciao. That's it. That's what I got. I am an American. I have become an English-speaking American. And that's the idea. The Romans thought over a long period of time, they thought they weren't going anywhere. And so they had 100 years to just breed out people. And that this would absorb them. And they do this to lots of other people. Lots of people become Roman and disappear. Carthaginians are probably the most important, most obvious. They existed and then they ceased to exist. The Gauls ceased to exist. Like, France is the land of the Franks, not the land of the Gauls. The Romans just absorbed them and bred them out. They became Roman. Britons, before the Romans, are gone. I mean, I guess there's a bit of the Welsh that can claim it. But Britain is Anglo-Saxon. It's Germanic. And then it becomes French because of the conquest in 1066. So, back to Jesus. The idea is that the world does end for Hebrews in 70 AD when the Romans destroy. And so what the gospel writers are talking about is that they are clearly making a reference because their audience would know it. They're writing in that period of the revolution, of the rebellion, of the destruction. And so they're clearly making the reference to 70 AD. But what being an apocalyptic prophet does is talk about really two things: loyalty to God above the emperor, and salvation is the purpose of life. And that is very different than Roman Gloria or Roman Virtus. That salvation is your goal in life. And that is also different in a lot of ways from ancient Hebrew traditions, which there is no heaven. There is no great place in the sky. You wait. You die and you wait. Just like Mesopotamian peoples, you wait in the darkness. Now, for most Mesopotamian peoples, you wait in the darkness until you fade away and people forget you. But the Hebrews do have this idea of not the second coming, because there's not a first coming, but that God will destroy the universe, and you'll then become one with God. I have to admit, I don't quite know enough about it and how it's different. But it's not heaven. Hebrews don't have this concept of a Christian heaven. And we're going to talk about that when we hit St. Augustine. But the idea is salvation. So this is new. Is the purpose of life. 3, it is a poor person's religion. Jesus is talking to poor people. His message is for poor people. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor. Right? He gives a list of the people who are blessed, and all of them are losers in the Roman world. But it makes sense why he's talking to these people. There's only one group of rich people. Well, there's two groups. The rich people are either Romans or people who collaborate with the Romans. See Matthew, the disciple who's also the tax collector. The only people who are wealthy in this world are people who work with the Roman conquerors or who are the Roman conquerors. Now, even the Roman conquerors as an individual aren't wealthy, but they're tied into, as a Roman citizen, they're tied into the Roman world of wealth. In a way, conquered Hebrews, Jews aren't. But they are defeated. He's talking to defeated people. And he's saying, you matter. You're important in this Roman world. Despite an entire world that says you're not important. Jesus is saying you are important. And that is revolutionary. That is huge. There's number 4. Magic. Jesus practices magic. Now, you will go, whoa. He's not pulling rabbits out of a hat. And I go, that's not magic. That's illusion. That's different. Magic is an important part of religion. It is the ability to control nature. That's what magic is. It's not illusion, pulling a rabbit out of a hat, something out of your sleeve, making a coin appear or disappear. That's illusion. That's not, we call it magic, but that's in a post-Christian world, and it gets complicated. But magic is very important to religion because it's the ability to control nature. You need to go. You practice. If you go to church, you practice magic. Because as a Catholic, the priest gets up, says some funky words, does a song, and what happens? The host, a piece of bread, becomes the body of Jesus. And a slug of wine becomes blood. That's magic. That's transubstantiation. It's magic. And this is very traditional. All of the prophets can do this. Look at Daniel, right? Daniel gets thrown into the furnace, and he's not burned. He gets thrown in with the lions and not eaten. Magic is the ability to control nature. No one would have taken Jesus seriously if he couldn't do magic. And he does magic all over the place. He's healing the sick, curing the blind, raising Lazarus from the dead. His first act of Jesus being Jesus is turning water into wine, and good wine. Now you will say, whoa, Professor. That's what we call a miracle. Yes, a miracle is magic, because magic is something that happens that can't be explained. That's what a miracle is. It's something that can't be explained by physics. And what magic does is say, Greek logic doesn't have all the answers. There are things about the world that can't be explained, that can be done. And nobody takes a prophet seriously if he doesn't have divine juice. And this is true in all of the religions. This is true for the saints, right? St. Patrick gets rid of all the snakes in Ireland. Like, to be a saint, you have to do miracles. And so the idea is magic is part of this. And Jesus is very traditional in this way. You have to be able to control nature. Otherwise, you're not taken seriously. So magic is an important part of Christianity, of Jesus' Christianity. And there is no bigger part that's magical than the host and the wine turning into the body and the blood of Jesus. Like, that is magic. You say a few words, you do a little dance, you sing a little hymn, and boom, it happens. And finally, 5 is it is evangelical. You have to go and talk to people. Jesus doesn't sit down. He doesn't bring people to him. He goes out. He's constantly on the move. It's also about the spirit, not the letter of the law. Why? Well, he's talking to an illiterate, poor population. And basically he says, trust thyself. You know what's right. You know what's wrong. Don't do the wrong things. See, the letter of the law, you need lawyers. You need educated people. You need to know how commas and apostrophes and semicolons work, how clauses work to do the letter of the law. It's not simple. You have to be literate. You need judges. You need lawyers to figure it out. At the very least, you need priests and rabbis who can tell you what the letter of the law is. Whereas the evangelical spirit is, you know it, trust yourself. You know what the law is. We see this in this famous scene with Jesus and the woman who's about to be stoned for being an adulterer. And he goes, he who is without sin cast the first stone. And that's basically saying, you know what you do. You know what's right. Yeah, the letter of the law is you bash this woman's head in. But is that really how you should be acting? Think for yourself. Feel for yourself. Trust in yourself. And so there's this, you have to go talk to people. You have to be part of their lives. You have to go out. This is very different, right? I have lived a long time, and I have never gotten a knock on the door and an Orthodox Jewish man wants me to become Jewish. But a week doesn't go by that a well-dressed young man, rarely a young woman, but usually it's a young man in a white shirt, white short-sleeve shirt, tells me about the Book of Mormon. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm Catholic. And they're like, oh, that's too bad. But we have a temple. And I'm like, yeah, I got basilicas. It's okay. So the idea is you got to go out and talk to people about it. But what are they talking about? The spirit, not the letter of the law, which is what people understand. People don't have a Torah in their house. Rich people do. Educated people might. But regular people, regular farmers don't. So the idea is you know how you should live. And he's constantly fighting with the people who are the letter of the law people. We talked about that earlier. Jesus is constantly fighting the people who bring out the Torah and go, see, right here, it says do this. And he's like, yeah, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. And so what we see in Jesus is a combination of traditional, prophetic, Jewish prophets, but also with some new liberal concepts about how to live, how Jews should live in this new Roman world. And so we have, Jesus is this interesting combination of the old and the new. That brings us to Paul. Paul is arguably as important as Jesus. Because without Paul, you don't get Christianity as Christianity. Jesus just talks to Jews. So Christianity before Paul is Jews for Jesus. All of his disciples are Jews. All of his apostles are Jews. His audience is overwhelmingly Jews. There are a couple of Romans that pop up, but he's talking to Jews in the Jewish homeland, being represented by Jews, talking about Jewish rules, laws, and a Jewish God for a Jewish audience. Paul is going to change that. Paul is jacked into the Roman world, and it's Paul that changes Christianity from Jews for Jesus into Christianity, a Roman religion. So, who is Paul? Paul is the second generation of Christian. He did not meet Jesus. He's a young man when Jesus' apostles are starting to be martyred and murdered. So this is important because he's going to be a convert. He's not a follower of Jesus in the way Peter is, who's an older generation, in the way Thomas is, who will go out to India. Paul is new. He's that second generation of disciple. And he's Roman. Now, he's not Italian. He's a Jew. He's Jewish. He's Hebrew. But he has Roman citizenship. His father was actually called the tent maker, which means what probably happened is a Roman emperor on his way to go fight the Parthians or the Persians, in 150 AD, it's going to be the Parthians still, out in Iran, would have stopped off in the Middle East and said, now, what would have happened is, as a Roman emperor and the Roman army moved from Italy to the east, it would have picked up supplies along the way. It wouldn't have started with everything. It would have started with kind of some of the stuff it needs. It would have picked up men along the way. It would have picked up army units along the way. It would pick up stuff along the way. And so what probably happened is he ended up, turned to Paul's father and said, all right, what do you make? He's like, oh, I make military supplies. I got tents. I got some pots and pans. I got the normal stuff like Roman soldiers need when they're not in war. And the Roman emperor probably said, look, I need 10,000 tents. Can you get me 10,000 tents? And probably Paul's father said, no, I can't get you 10,000 tents. But I can give you, say, 500 or 1,000 tents. And I could put you in touch with other guys who can make you the rest of the tents. And the emperor probably said, great, that's fine. But look, I have no money to pay you. I've got some money. I could give you a little bit of money. But how about I make you a Roman citizen? And Paul's father said, oh, yes. Roman citizenship, like American citizenship, was huge, was the thing you wanted, because it jacked you in to the entire Roman world. You were able to travel. You were able to get credit. You were able, in some cases, to vote in local elections. You were protected by the law in a way, other people aren't protected. Roman law protected Romans differently than colonial law did. And so, did Paul's father lose money? Yes. Did he gain something infinitely more valuable? Yes. Because not only was Paul's father a Roman citizen, his wife was a Roman citizen. His kids, their kids' kids would be Roman citizens. And that jacks them into a larger world. Right from the beginning. So Paul grows up in this world that's not the Hebrew world of, say, Peter or James. He grows up in a larger world connected to these Romans, these Italians, the Greeks. And so what he does is combine Jewish Christianity with Roman culture. Ultimately, that's the importance of Paul, which is why he's a very big saint in Italy to Italians. I have a cousin, Paul. I have a brother, Peter. Like, there are no Italian families that don't have a Peter and a Paul in them. They all have, and many have multiples. I know Italian families where the first son is a Peter, second son is a Paul, third son is a Michael, and then the fourth son is an Anthony, right? For Antonius. There's your Italian, right? There's your Roman. Because Anthony is a Roman name, not a Jewish name. But Peter, Paul. So what he does is combine Christianity into this Roman culture. And in doing so, separates Judaism from Christianity. What he does is separate Judaism from Christianity. See, Judaism requires you don't eat pork. Romans eat pork. You got to be circumcised. Romans do not get circumcised. And so right, Jews also have monotheism, one God, whereas Italians have multiple gods. We'll talk about that in a second. So the idea is that what Paul does is rip the Judaism part out of being a Christian. You didn't have to do all that stuff anymore. And you could see why this would happen, right? You have to think. He's in Italy. He's in Greece, Asia Minor. He's in the Greek world. He's in a town. He gets up in the public square and says, like many others were telling about people about their gods, he gets up and says, let me tell you about Jesus. He loves poor people. And people go, oh, well, let me listen about this because I'm poor. You know, he's promising salvation. Oh, okay. He's probably promising a better afterlife. We don't really know what the afterlife is, but we do know it's better. Oh, okay. Well, my life currently sucks because I'm poor and or enslaved. So tell me about this. And he tells them about Jesus, and you'll get a crowd, and people will be like, yeah, Jesus is awesome. I'm with you. And then someone goes, what do we have to do? Because every religion has a buy-in, right? We talked about this with the 3 goats. There's something you have to do in order to get this God to like you, to buy in. Remember Abraham. Abraham had to get circumcised, right? There's always a buy-in with gods. So people go, what's the buy-in? What do I have to do? And Paul says, oh, okay, well, you have to get circumcised. And people go, well, wait, what's that? Like, all right, take a look at your bippy. I'm like, yeah. See that part? That's your turtleneck? And they're like, yeah. Like, cut that off. And people go, yeah, no. And they automatically, you will leave. You'll lose half your crowd. Most of your men are going to be like, yeah, I'll keep Zeus. Thank you very much. And walk away. Right? Now, what you're left with is women who are like, that doesn't bother me at all. And some hardcore dudes who are like, it's okay. It's a month of, not being very comfortable, but it will heal. It'll be cool. We'll be fine. It will be okay. What else do we have to do anything else? He's like, yes, you have to not eat pork. You know your sauce that you make with pork? No more. Bacon? No more. Pork chops? No more. And every Italian woman looks at him and goes, you are insane. This is crazy. This is the craziest religion I've ever heard. It's like, well, it's just based on the Jewish stuff. He's like, the Jewish stuff? You mean the people who have the wacky one God thing? You're crazy. That's insane. And they walk away. And you could see Peter being like, oh my God, my audience has just walked away. Like, he can maybe sell this in a Jewish in Judea. He can't do it in Greece. He can't do it in Ionia. He can't do it in Italy. And you see, the people walk away and he goes, oh, wait. I'm just kidding. That's silly stuff. Silly Jewish stuff. Come back. And the people come back and go, wait. Circumcision? I meant you don't have to get circumcised. Pork? You can eat pork. Destroying all your images? You can keep them. Just call them Jesus. You can keep them. You only have to do two things. You have to say you love Jesus and take a bath. And the Romans look at each other and go, I already take baths. I take baths every couple days. And they're like, great. You just take a bath and say you love Jesus. And people go, oh, I could do that. And there's your crack right there. Paul, I keep calling it Peter. Paul, in trying to convert people, realizing that the Jewish notion of being Jewish, the things that, remember, separated them out as Hebrews from other people, isn't going to work in this globalized world. The Romans are not going to change. So since the Romans don't change, Christianity has to change. And so now you could be a Christian without being Jewish and without doing any of the Jewish stuff. And so what happens is there's a crack now. In one generation, Christianity goes from Jews for Jesus to Christians are Roman, to being a Roman religion. And it cracks. And what will happen is they will become more and more and more and more separate as time goes on. So that I have Jewish friends today who do not understand the Catholic Mass at all. They're like, what is this craziness? And I have sat in synagogue and been like, all right, this is cool. I understand what's kind of going on. It's different. It's that you just separate completely out these two religions. And so that as time goes on, they get further and further and further away from each other. Finally, fourth about Paul is conversion. He's a convert. He wasn't a Christian, and then he became a Christian. He literally saw the light. And we still use this phrase about one who converts. You come around, you see the light. And the idea of this is that anybody can be a Christian. And that is natio. That is the Roman concept. There is no more Roman concept than this. Remember, Hebrews don't convert anybody. They don't want to convert people. They take the Athenian Greek view of this. The more Hebrews there are, the less special I am. I am the chosen people. If everyone becomes Hebrew, then I am less special. But the Roman world has natio. Anyone can be a Roman. And so the idea for Paul that the others don't have, there is in fact a fight between Paul and Peter about this. Because Peter represents the older Jewish way of sticking to yourselves, being isolated from the larger world, which we talked about in part 1 of our class. Whereas Paul represents the globalized Roman world. And he believes in natio. He's a Roman. So he believes in the Roman idea that anybody can be a Roman. So if anyone can be a Roman, he's perfectly fine with anyone being a Christian. British tribesmen? Yes. Let's go to Britain. Spanish miners? Yes. Scythian horse lords? Sure. Why not? Anyone. And so conversion becomes a major part of of this religion. Paul is a convert. He believes in the Roman concept of natio. And so that gets incorporated in. And again, that's a separation of Judaism from Christianity. So what happens is Christianity will spread slowly at first. And then after Constantine becomes emperor, it will pick up. But there's not an overwhelming philosophy to early Christianity. There's a lot of fights. There's a Nicene Creed. Well, that's in the 300s, excuse me. That's a little farther. There's Origen. There are people who are starting to make rules, who are starting to figure it out, who are starting to use the Gospels and then the Acts and then the letters, and they're trying to formate a new religion. They're going from what was essentially a personality cult, Jews for Jesus, into making it something more substantial, something that can survive beyond not just Jesus, but the original apostles, the people who knew Jesus, who could say, well, Jesus told me this. Like, for it to be a religion, it's got to survive beyond that. It's got to, and there are people, early philosophers, and I highly recommend taking a course in comparative religions who will talk about this. But the biggest and most important is St. Augustine. Now, St. Augustine is from 354 to 430 AD. He's at the end of the Roman Empire. He watches the Roman Empire collapse. And that is an important part of his philosophy. He is the first real big Christian philosopher. That's going to really matter. Like we still teach him today. I'm teaching him right now. And what he does is combine Christianity with Greek philosophy, with Plato and Aristotle. Educated Romans are going to study the Greeks because the Greeks were smart. And so the Romans study the Greeks. But Judaism and early Christianity is a rejection of the Greek philosophical world. It's different. It's separate. Right? Hebrew philosophy is older than the Greeks. Right? The Torah is coming out in the 500s, is being put together in the 500s BC in a world where Mesopotamians still ran the show, where the Greeks are still relatively isolated back in Greece. The Roman world, on the other hand, is the world of Plato and Aristotle and Greek philosophy and this incorporation. And so what St. Augustine is going to do is combine the two. He's going to say, you know your Greeks, you know your Plato, you know your Aristotle. Well, this is how Christianity belief works. And so the first is Confessions. He's got two books, and the first is Confessions. And Confessions is quite a work. And I don't mean that in the blow your mind back. It's an interesting book. It is, in many ways, the foundation of Christian guilt, of Catholic guilt. Because the idea is he feels overwhelmingly guilty for some of the stuff he does. And modern people will look at that and go, yeah, that's not so bad. Like, so, but Confessions is anyone can be a Christian. Very Roman, right? Makes sense in the 300s. Very Roman. Anyone can be a Christian. 2, only God can satisfy your soul versus sin. Confessions is very much a why do you do what you do kind of book. And he uses himself. It's a diary. It's not quite a diary, but it's a self-examination. This is how I acted, and this is how Christianity helped me. It's self-help. And only God can satisfy your soul is what every Addiction Anonymous group will tell you. Right? Step 1 is, I am not in control. Step 2 is, I need a higher power. Only God can do this. Here, it's Confessions is St. Augustine asking, why do we do bad things? Why do we do things we shouldn't do, that we know we shouldn't do? Why are we addicted to things? Now remember, they have no science about disease here. So they looked at virtue. They looked at ethics. They looked at you get to choose your behavior. So why do you choose to have sex with people you shouldn't be having sex with? Why are you choosing to get drunk? Why are you choosing to do drugs? Why? And the idea of that is it's fun. All of those things are fun. Like, this is the nice part about St. Augustine. He feels guilty, but he also tells you he had a good time. All the bad stuff he does felt good at the time he was doing them. And sin is fun, which is why your parents are always telling you, don't do that. Well, they're worried because they know you'll do it. Why? Because it's fun. This is why your parents are obsessed with your drinking, drugs, and sex. And they spend a lot of energy. If you're one of my teenage to 25-year-old students, they're going to spend a lot of energy with curfews and fights with you and monitoring you and doing all of these things and all these talks, if they talk at all to you. But think about that talk. We have to sit down and now let's talk about consent and sex, and we have to talk about what you should do and shouldn't do. Like, that's tiring. That's energy that they wish they could spend playing video games, doing something else. They're going to spend a lot of energy in trying to keep you from doing stuff that's fun. But think about how much energy they put into stopping you from cutting off your thumbs. Virtually none. I bet you never had an awkward talk where your mom sat you down and said, okay, let's talk. I know what all the kids are doing now, and you're going to have friends who are going to say it's okay. And you may feel that you're ready for it. But I want to tell you, you shouldn't cut off your thumbs. You should keep your thumbs where they are. You should just concentrate on school. It will come. There will be a day when it will be perfectly fine to cut off your thumbs. But right now, you're 15, you're 17, and that's a little young to be cutting off your thumbs. Nobody has had that conversation. In fact, most of you have parents who leave knives right out. Big old block butcher knives, big old cutting knives right there in a butcher's block. Boom, right? Anyone could just pick them right up. And you go, Professor, this is insane. No one cuts off their thumbs. And you're like, exactly. Why? Why are they worried about you having sex but not cutting off your thumbs? Why? Because sex is fun. And cutting off your thumb is definitely not. And so you don't have to, your parents don't worry about, society doesn't have to worry about you doing things that are painful, that are hurtful. Now we know now that's not always true. That there are diseases where people punish themselves, cutting, for example, or anorexia or bulimia, where they punish themselves. Suicide, the act of self-destruction. But that's not sin. That's different. Sin is fun. Sin can be self-destructive, but it's also fun. Whereas cutting, bulimia, anorexia, and suicide all come from places of immense pain. They're not fun. They're a release or an attempt at release from pain. And go to Buddhism for that. That's what Buddha will talk about. So what St. Augustine is talking about is, here's the problem with sin. The bottle runs out. The drugs run out and wear off. The person you had sex with leaves, or you leave. Your money runs out. Like, eventually, You're left because you're consuming a thing that is limited. You eventually run out of it. And you're left in the same place, unsatisfied with this hole in your soul, which is what any anonymous group will talk about. I feel empty. I feel a hole, and I'm trying to fill it with these things that are limited, that exist for a moment, but then are gone. And what Augustine is saying is, it's okay. Only God can satisfy your soul. You need God because God is infinite, whereas drugs are finite. So you could take God, put him in your soul, and boom, you can never run out of God. God is love. God is always there. God is my homeboy. God can satisfy your soul in a way sin can't. His next book is City of God. And this deals with the end of Rome. He's writing this at around 410 AD. And Rome is ending. Rome is being invaded. The northern frontiers are being collapsed. In fact, he'll run into Vandals, will end up in North Africa. And that's crazy because you have to understand who the Vandals are. Vandals are Germanic tribesmen who cross France, cross Spain, cross into Morocco, then cross Africa to end up in Carthage, where St. Augustine is. That's thousands of miles of migration. And they're Vandals because they like to destroy stuff, but they're not real barbarians by the time they get to, like, they're cold, their name versus their actual destruction is, which is why we call vandalizing, right? You're vandalizing is you graffiti, you're vandalizing. This is hardly the Huns or the Mongols obliterating entire cities. Like, the Vandals just don't do that. The Vandals just basically steal art and money and stuff. And so people are worried. What's going to happen? What is going on? What can we do when Rome ends? Is Rome going to end? And Augustine says, don't worry about it. Heaven is the key, not earth. Heaven is your goal, not earth. Rome can come and go. Now remember, Rome has existed forever as far as people understand. The Roman Empire, and before that the Roman Republic, like, they're Romans. They didn't live in a world without Rome. So the idea that there might not be a Rome is a crazy idea to start with. But Augustine's like, it'll be okay. Why? Because heaven is the key. Not earth. Not your life on earth. Your life on earth is to get you into heaven. So, do you need to save Rome? Not really. Should you fight to the last man to save Rome? You don't have to. You can if you want. But you don't have to because that's not the biggest goal. The biggest goal is to get into heaven and hang out with Jesus. And this freaks people out because they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Look, I have read my Gospels. The Bible is just starting to be put together by this point. How far it has spread is a matter of dispute because it's not really put together till the 300s in an organized one book. But I know my Gospels. And I know Jesus talks about heaven. And he talks about how heaven is great and how he's there and we get to hang out with him. But what is heaven like? Like, no one has described it. There is no description of heaven. What is heaven like? Is it just me and Jesus staring at each other forever? I mean, that sounds kind of cool, but also really boring. Like, what is it like? What is heaven? And Augustine goes, well, do you know your Plato? And these people go, we're Roman. Of course we know our Plato. What do you think? We're idiots? Of course, we've studied Plato. I have Plato's 101, Plato 102, Plato 201. Yeah, we've studied Plato. So, and he's like, you know how he talks about the forms, the perfect form in the ether? That place that's very far away that you can't go to, see, taste, or touch, or experience? And everything there is perfect? And they're like, yeah, that's heaven. Like, oh. Oh. See, Plato's not a Christian. If Plato was a Christian, he wouldn't have called it the ether, E-T-H-E-R. He would have called it heaven. But he's a Greek. He wasn't a Christian. Oh. So everything there is perfect. So what's there? And like, well, everything is there in its perfect form. So there's a perfect Rome. And this is city of God. Rome, heaven is a city. It's Rome. Why? Why would it be a city? See, your idea of heaven, I bet, is not a city. I bet it's suburbs. Why? Because you're a suburban people. Americans are a suburban people. And so it's parks, it's greenery, it's trees, it's rivers, it's lakes. But with enough urbanization that it's not countrified. It's not the wilderness. It's not a forest. For some of you, it might be those things. But I bet if I asked you, what does your idea of heaven is, it probably reflects your life just better. The Simpsons has an episode where Homer goes to heaven, and everything. It's a suburban place, streets, street lamps, houses, dogs, puppies, but everything is made out of chocolate. And so Homer can eat everything. But it wasn't a city, and it wasn't a forest. It was the suburbs, was his idea of heaven. And so for the Romans, the idea of heaven is a city. It's Rome. And Rome is led by the emperor, as it has been for 400 years. And so what you get is the perfect city run by the perfect emperor, God. And so heaven is perfect. It's a perfect Rome and a perfect emperor. That's God. So God is perfect, and that's new. This is new. God is, read your Old Testament, God is good. God is just. God is not perfect in the Torah. God is selfish. God is angry. God is vindictive. He's jealous. He says it in the first command. I am a jealous God. Jealous isn't a good virtue. God is not perfect. Even Jesus is not perfect. Even though he gets the representation of being perfect, he gets angry. He talks back to his mom. His mom's first miracle is, Jesus, go do something about this water thing, this wine thing. Go do something. He's like, woman, I don't have time for that. She's like, you are going to go and do this. Don't you talk back to me. Okay, Mom. Okay. Like, Jesus gets angry. He loses his shit with the money changers. He waits 3 days for Lazarus. And you may say, well, it's okay because he brings Lazarus back, but he lets Lazarus die too. Like, he shows up and Mary and Martha are like, if you showed up earlier, he wouldn't be dead. And Jesus is like, I know, I could have cured him. I decided not to because I'm going to do something even cooler than that. But it's not cooler for Lazarus. Lazarus had to die. Which means Lazarus has to come back. Which means Lazarus has to die again. Which sucks. Dying sucks. If you have ever been around anybody who has passed away, who has died, this sucks. It sucks for them. It sucks for you. For those who are left behind. Now, Jesus has a bigger mission to do, but that's not perfect either. Because for 3 days, Mary and Martha had to suffer the heartache of watching their brother die and then bury him. And then Jesus comes along and goes, I got this, and brings him back, which is great, but it also means that he has to die again. But that's okay. See, Jesus shouldn't be perfect. I like that Jesus is imperfect because that makes him more approachable, accessible, because Jesus is human as well as divine. If he was only divine, he'd be untouchable. And he'd be a lot less interesting. Whereas his humanness, his fault, there's a book somewhere I heard, which was Jesus Farted. It's called Jesus Farted. And it's to remind you that Jesus wasn't perfect. That Jesus lived the life of a human. He ran away from his parents when he was like 8 and 12. Now, it's a nice story. Hey, he's hanging out with the rabbis and he's like he's better at Jewish law than they are. But if you're his mom or his dad for an hour, for 2 hours, searching for him, if you have ever lost a child in a mall, and you find him on the carousel, you're not like, oh, you little scamp, you're great, you're perfect. No, you're like, oh my God, never walk away again. Do you know what you did to me? I lost 10 years of my life. The adrenaline pumping through me, it's making my eyes turn black. My hair is going to fall out. Holy Jesus, I thought you were lost. And he's just on the carousel being like, I'm on a donkey. Like, oh my God. Mommy, I'm not. Oh God. So this is new. Heaven is perfect. Jesus is perfect. God is perfect. But that's an invention. It's an invention of Augustine by taking Plato and combining it with Christianity so that heaven becomes perfect. God becomes perfect. Jesus becomes perfect because Jesus is God. And that is new. And what that does is give Christianity the ability to absorb Greek philosophy, which everyone accepted was true, was right. It was the smartest philosophy around. And now go into the Middle Ages, armed with this. Into the Middle Ages where people are going to become illiterate, where people are going to lose their cities, where people are going to become superstitious, and it could go in armed with Plato and Aristotle, and not just the Torah, and not just the Gospels, but also this foundational, this philosophy built upon it. Okay, let's talk about the conversion of the Roman world. As we talked about, the Roman world, Christianity spreads slowly. It spreads among poor people, and it spreads among some rich people too, or middle-class people. In the early days, it's very communistic. You gave up everything. Remember, Jesus walked around, he didn't own anything. The apostles don't own anything. And so the idea was early Christianity wasn't capitalistic at all. It was communistic. You gave up things to the church, and you worked for the church. Christianity will be ignored because it's small and no one cares. It will be attacked. Nero will blame Christians for the burning of Rome. Early governors will be like, how do I deal with these people? And the answer is, as long as they're not causing revolution, let them be. Like, as long as they're being loyal to the emperor and they're not blowing stuff up, of which Jesus does not approve. Remember, Jesus is this conservative in this way. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He specifically says, do not revolt against Caesar. Do not revolt against the emperors, against Rome. Remember, Caesar represents Rome. It's not, Caesar is the title. In Jesus' early life, it would have been Augustine when he was a child and Tiberius, the Emperor Tiberius, when he's an adult. And so the word is like, all right, deal with it. And, it's a new religion, so that's a problem. The Romans are not cool with new religions, But there's also as long as they're loyal, like, you don't need to murder all of them. Like, try to get them to convert back. Try to get them to be, Roman. That type of thing. And different emperors do different things. Some emperors will want full loyalty. And when that happens, you get your purges. You get your arrests. You get, they want, the idea is that you have to have Roman gods, or at least acceptable non-Roman gods. And Jesus is and there's a big debate. Is Jesus a new god, or is Jesus the Jewish God? And the answer is, it's a new God. The Roman answer is, it's a new God. Like, the Jews are like, no, Jesus, he might have been Jewish, but he's not a Jewish God. We got our one God, and our God is acceptable. Thank you very much. And the Romans are like, yeah, we know it's acceptable. We're cool. You don't have to keep telling us that. We're fine. It's weird, but it's fine. So this Jesus thing is new, so we're going to prosecute them as weirdos. So Christians in after 60 AD, 100 AD especially, are like modern Mormons. They're acceptable at times, but also considered very weird and occasionally considered not really Roman and need to be persecuted and prosecuted, as early Mormons were. So early Mormons will say, no, we're Christian. And then Protestant Americans will go, who's this Mordecai guy? And they're like, oh, well, he says, oh, wait. Yeah. And what about your golden tablets? Like, yeah, well, that's not in the Bible. Yeah. And you have an entire book of Mormon. Like, yeah, that's... But we love Jesus. We got Jesus and weird underwear. And they're like... And so the story of the Mormons is being kicked out of New York, being kicked out of Illinois, being kicked out of Missouri, and nearly being exterminated. It is prosecution and persecution. And that is the early Christianity until Constantine. Constantine is a Roman soldier. He's the son of one of Diocletian's right-hand men. And ultimately, he's a soldier who becomes emperor. But he's not a nobody. His father was one of the Emperor Diocletian's homeboys. And what happened is, as Diocletian retired, Constantine's dad got ridden out of the succession plan. He got replaced. And the father said, I ain't going away. I was going to get an inheritance here. I'm not disappearing. And he dies. And Constantine goes, well, I'm not disappearing. I'm not losing my dad's inheritance. I'm going to fight for it. And so there's a civil war. There's a civil war. And he wins. He wins at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. He wins. And he becomes emperor. Now, here's the thing. The day before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Jesus comes to him. And says, fight in my name. Now, that sounds crazy, but it's not. Emperors, important people, gods came to. Remember, it's a very permeable thing. Remember, Jesus walked the earth. Like, gods can come down and hang out with people. Gods came in dreams. Dreams were prophetic. They were part of being an important person. Like, you get people today who say, I pray to Jesus. Jesus talks to me. And you're like, that's crazy. And you're like, well, he doesn't say, hey, how are you doing, Dan? It's more like you get the feelings. But, so this is not a crazy idea. It sounds crazy, but it's not. And so Jesus comes to Constantine in a dream and says, fight for me, fight in my name. And so what Constantine does is have the Chi-Rho, the P and the X, the symbol, that's the symbol for Jesus. That's a Greek symbol for Jesus. Put on his sword, on his shields. They paint them on. They're like, the Roman soldier, like, whatever, dude, I'll do this. I don't want to die. I'm fighting other Romans. And they win. They win the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Now, that's important. Why? Because what has happened is the Christian God has demonstrated his power. The Christian God has come to a Roman soldier and said, fight for me and you will win. The Roman soldier does so. He becomes emperor. Constantine can't turn his back on Jesus. He's got to give him props. A God who helps you win is a powerful God. And so what he does is legalize Christianity in 313. That doesn't do anything. It just makes Christianity legal. You're allowed to be a Christian now. It doesn't make it respectable. It doesn't make it acceptable. It just means you can't be murdered if you're a Christian, just for being a Christian. He legalizes it. He does not make other religions illegal. He just legalizes Christianity. It's one of many, right? We're in the monolatry part. And Constantine converts, but how Christian is Constantine? He's in the monolatry thing. He's like, yeah, Jesus is cool, but I like Jupiter and Zeus and all these other gods too. I'm an emperor. I'm cool with all the gods. But what he didn't like was Rome. He had never lived in Rome. And when he finally walks into Rome as a conqueror, the Romans don't like him. And the Romans don't like Christianity. Because Rome is the center of polytheism. For obvious reasons. Polytheism won an empire. Why would you want monotheism? That's stupid. Why would you choose a foreign god who got conquered back in the day for your Italian native gods who won you the world? Like, that's crazy. And so Constantine doesn't like Rome. Doesn't like it at all. And so he builds a new capital. He builds a Christian capital, Constantinople, in the east, on the border between Greece and Asia, where Istanbul is today. And this is going to be a major city throughout the entire Middle Ages. It's the new Rome. It's called the new Rome. And what it is a capital nearer to the fronts. Like, Rome is in the middle of nowhere in the Italian Empire, in this Roman Empire. Constantinople is closer to the northern borders and closer to the eastern borders against Persia. So it's more in the thick of things. It's near the Danube River, which allows you to get up the river up into Germany, up into Switzerland, up into the Alps. And so it's easier to move than Rome is. Rome is on a river, the Tiber River. It's not that big of a river. It doesn't go anywhere in Italy. It's in the middle. It's not. Rome is Rome because Romans made Rome Rome. But there's no reason why Rome should be the capital of an empire. Constantinople, on the other hand, is going to be a major city for the next 1,000 years, 1,500 years. So, he builds Constantinople, and he's going to build this as a Christian capital, not a polytheistic one. And so what you get is imperial support for Christianity. Remember, Constantine is a usurper. He doesn't have a lot of legitimacy. He won, but that doesn't mean everyone just accepts him as being awesome. He's got to shore up support. And the one group he knows he's got is soldiers he can pay and Christians. Because Christians were exploited, persecuted, and prosecuted for the last 200 years. Now, they can come out in the open. Now they can be proud of who they are. Now they're not going to be murdered or thrown in jail. And that's only because of Constantine. And so they're like, when Constantine says jump, they're like, woohoo! They don't even ask how high. Constantine is their homeboy. And so what you get is superior support for Christianity. We're going to build churches. We're going to hire priests. These are jobs. This is going to be support. This is going to be money. If you could put, I'm a Christian on your resume, you got a job. You could get, I shouldn't say that. You could get a job. So when Constantine says, I need blacksmiths to make horseshoes for my cavalry. Send in your resumes. He made 2 piles. He made the Christian pile and he made the non-Christian pile. Now, if you don't get the job as a non-Christian, eventually you go, I better become a Christian so I could get one of these cool, lucrative jobs. And so what Christianity became was jobs and support, and it became money, right? Constantine is going to have homeboys and henchmen. And who are these guys going to be? He's going to want Christians to be them because he can trust the Christians to be loyal. And so what you get is the victory of Christianity. If you want to be somebody in this society, you better become a Christian. We're going to see this happen in the Islamic world. When the Islamic world captures the Christian East, for a long time, Christians don't convert, except the elites. The elites convert. Why? Because they want to stay elites. And if you wanted to be a governor, a lawyer, a judge, a general, you had to be a Muslim. You had to be a Christian in Constantine's world. You wanted to be an architect and get good jobs. And remember, government always spends more than it has to. It's buying loyalty. It's not only buying the church, it's buying the loyalty that comes along with that. So it's always like the pyramids. You're always paying top price for things because you want the workers to walk away going, that guy is awesome. You want the architects to be like, I'm going to do a great job for this guy. So you always pay top dollar. So government contracts are always good, always lucrative. And so what you get is the victory of Christianity. Christianity now spreads. Eventually, the next couple of emperors will be Christian emperors. There is one that is polytheistic and tries to go back, tries to bring it back, and he might have succeeded, but he dies. I think he's murdered. Is he murdered and dies in battle? Philip the Agnostic, right? Isn't that the emperor? And let me take a look. Real-time research, right, when we're doing it. No. Nope. I'd have to look it up. But there's one emperor that attempts to go back to polytheism, to the old gods. And it doesn't really work. I mean, he could have. He's kind of like Queen Mary during the Tudor dynasty. Queen Mary doesn't live long enough to make England Catholic again. And she comes between Henry VIII, who is Protestant, and Edward, who is Protestant. And then she comes in Catholic, tries to make things Catholic again. And she could have succeeded if she had an heir, if she had ruled for 20 years. But she dies, and her sister, her half-sister, Elizabeth, takes over, and Elizabeth will rule for 60 years. So since Elizabeth is in charge for so long, and she's a Protestant, England basically becomes Protestant, and that's the end of it. That's how Christianity ends up taking over the Roman world. It's a series of Christian emperors, one polytheistic emperor, and then Christian emperors again. And so it's seen as this blip. Kind of like Amenhotep in Egypt, who has the sun god. He rules for 18 years, and he's like, oh, we're going to have a sun god. We're going to have one god. And then he dies, and people stop caring because the next emperor, the next pharaoh, goes back to the old gods. And so it's this blip. So Christianity survives because it ties itself and is tied to the Roman imperial structure, Roman support. The emperor, loyalty to the emperor. Like up to this point, Christians don't join the army. Now they're going to join the army. They're going to fight for the emperor because they know if the emperor goes down and a polytheistic emperor comes in, they're going to be in trouble. So they want a Roman emperor in a Roman city, in a Christian. They want a Christian emperor in a Christian city, Christian capital, and they are willing to fight for that in a Roman Christian army. And so what you get is Christianity's victory. All right. So that is Christianity, and a huge lecture at that.